The next session is going to be chaired by an esteemed colleague and a friend, if I might call you, sir, Shri P.C. Haldar, who is the president of Policy Perspectives Foundation in New Delhi. And all the panelists, all his speakers, may I request you all to please take your seats on the stage. And while they're doing that, I'd like to also introduce or say a few words about Dr. Shri P.C. Haldar. Please come. All your speak. Yes. Pradyot Chandra Haldar joined the Indian Police Service in 1970, and he was allocated Bihar cadre. And during his career with the IPS, he remained posted in Bihar, Madhya Pradesh, Delhi, and the Northeast region, which actually came in very handy for his future assignments, as you will see. He joined the select band of officers earmarked for the Intelligence Bureau and served in the IB for over 3 decades, finally retiring as the Director, IB. Recipient of both the Police Medal for Meritorious Service and the President's Police Medal for Distinguished Service, he has, since 2009, served on several national level committees dealing with issues relating to national security, namely the Task Force for Security set up by the Atomic Energy Commission, 2-member committee to review the functioning of the intelligence organizations, the Task Force on National Security set up by the Union Government, and he's also been a member of the National Security Advisory Board, NSAB, from 2011 to 2015, which meant 2 terms. He has vast experience of working in the conflict resolution, and he was actively involved with the peace processes with the Naga groups in the 90s. That's where I mentioned about his experience in the Northeast. He has been actively involved with conflict resolutions in the Northeast region for over 2 decades, successfully bringing a number of militant organizations to the negotiating table. He was the Government of India representative for peace talks until 31st December 2016 and is now currently the President of Policy Perspective Foundation since 2015. Ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Haldar.
Good morning, everybody. Mr. Dr. Mashelkar, Dr. Kelkar, Lieutenant General Patankarji, and my colleagues in the PDNS and the gathered guest today. You know, this opportunity today is particularly grateful because we have been missing this physical meeting in Pune for the PDNS for last 2 years. So this is a great opportunity, and I thank PDNS for reverting to the old format. As regards this session, I have very eminent speakers with me to talk on this subject. We have Mr. Gurbachan Jagat, is been DG J&K, he has been Governor Manipur, and he is by all consensus is a person very conversant with both the governance as well as dealing with difficult situations in Punjab as well as in this thing. Then I have former Home Secretary, Sir Gopal Pillai, another stalwart. I have worked with him, so I know how efficient and how sharp is his understanding of the problems. And unlike most bureaucrats, he is very actively seeking solution when he sees a problem. That makes him different. And then I have another stalwart, Mr. Ajay Sahni, a great analyst. And we have seen for decades now. He has a very sharp eye, soft tongue. So, but he always surprises with his analytical sort of suggestions. The topic that we have today, India's impact of internal dimensions of national security and the internal side. So both the last evening's lecture by Dr. Baru and the today's inaugural address by Sri Mishri have actually made our job easier, in the sense that we do not have to explain where we are trying to go, because there are a number of issues on which we seek attention. We seek attention because we believe that our armed forces and defense elements which are at the border, they need support from the internal side, both in terms of the economic support, both the support of being this thing, and that can only happen if we have a very cohesive policy pursuance, which very rightly Mr. Mistry referred to, that we can leave our silos and probably work in some manner jointly. So far, I have done my entire career in trying to pursue this. We always falter at the, what could I say, intersection of departmental responsibilities, where good work done by A and good work done by B do not mean A plus B. It means a little less than that, and sometimes quite below the expectation. So this is something which we are to this thing, but we have only about 1.5 hours time, so we will request our speakers to give about 20 minutes of presentation, then we'll throw open the house for discussion. We are choosing what since we are discussing impacts, we are trying to see what actually impact on the people, on the sectors like economy has been mentioned, but even in terms of agriculture, which happened to be the best performing in the pandemic year, but at the same time, it is probably the worst looked after at the moment through policies. Various subsidies are given, but there is a good deal of reform, etc., is needed there, both in terms of this thing. So these issues, and also the normal traditional threats like terrorism, etc., that will be discussed by our panelists. And I agree with Mr. Mishri's comment that today the situation is such that the war will not only be played at the border, it will be played in our own lanes, in our own institutions, in our own backyards, which means there will be surreptitious attacks, there will be covered attack, and he also mentioned very rightly that there will be attempt to enter your areas of this thing. That is already happening. Sometimes by soft power, sometimes by other means. And you have, in a connected world, like for instance, I'll mention this, that our trade deficit with China restrains our ability to do something very drastic. We need to take into consideration such this thing. And the global financial downturn that is anticipated at the moment, we have to prepare for it. we have a large aspirant youth who expect to be looked after by the state. And that is also the element which is very, very vulnerable to motivated propaganda. So this is where we are looking at. It's a very diverse and very dangerous terrain that we see, but India has always been resilient whenever a crisis comes. The challenge probably is that we must have a structure of resilience even when there is no crisis before us. Then only we can break away and become a power that, right now, our GDP-based economic strength does not look after nearly 30 to 35% of our people. They remain below the poverty line. So when we take satisfaction in our GDP figures, we are actually not looking at or not caring for that section. And we need to go deeper and see what is happening in that section and who is going to manipulate, possibly. I'm not saying they're being manipulated, but what is happening, that we must see. So it is this, with this hope that the speakers will speak their mind. May I request Mr. Gopal Pillai to open the...
Thank you, Haldar. Distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. First of all, let me thank PDNS for inviting me to say a few words. First, sometimes I think we make things very complicated when things are should be very simple. And I'm talking about issues like the rule of law and accountability. Now, if you do not follow the rule of law by lawmakers, law enforcers, then don't blame the system, World Economic Order, and everybody else for what happens. The rule of law applies to all citizens of India equally. That's under the Indian Constitution, and all officers who have been there have all sworn our oath to the Constitution. And in this context, that if you do not follow, and the state does not follow the rule of law, both ruling in the center and in the states, different states, all of them, I'm treating them equally culpable, then we are running into a series of problems that will keep on haunting us again and again. And therefore, I'll split my talk into sort of first few minutes into what I call as internal security issues. And then I'll talk a little bit on what I think, in a sense, Sanjay Baru, yesterday's talk, which I did not say. That is on the economic power being what we can use for national enforcement of national power. I actually see two main, and maybe three if you want to put it, three real threats to internal security in India. One is the growing communal polarization. If one section of the society is treated as not enough of an Indian, you are running into problems where they will see no hope other than to take up arms against the state, to subvert the state, to create problems. And it is something that we have to be prepared for. The process has already begun. We have seen it happening. It is only going to grow. Even in the communities that I'm talking about, many of the older members are asking for patience. The younger are saying that we see no hope for us and we have to take our own measures. This is something which I'm sure intelligence personnel, etc., are also telling the government. If they're not, and therefore you'll see that impact of that. And I think this is something which we have to worry about, because it can upset every single plan you have of economic development, national power, etc. That's one issue. The second major threat, and which the Deputy National Secretary mentioned, is actually cyber security threats and the growing role of social media. This it is there. We just have to handle it. I don't think anybody really knows how to handle it fully. Everybody is struggling, but it's going to be there. It's going to hit industry. You saw, I think, just the other day, the Online Institute of Medical Sciences was down. It's not only in India, across the world. I know that it's one of the German hospitals actually paid $1 million because their critical care unit was taken over by the ransomware attackers who said that we'll shut down everything unless you pay us. And they paid first and then reported to the police. The system may not be so bad in the Online Institute of Medical Sciences, but this is something that is going to happen. There are enough state and non-state players across the world, both sides of the equation. Please don't have any misunderstanding whether it is all going to be only those who are, inverted commas, hostile to us. There are also people who are friendly to us are also in this racket, if I may say, of ransomware and attacking critical infrastructure. Because they are testing out systems. It's sort of a process which is going on, and this is something that's going to be extremely critical in days to come. What we have to see, and the third aspect, which is a small aspect, is because critical infrastructure we have really not looked at. I'm just saying because I'm on the board of Adani Ports, and we have a whole system of both cybersecurity and ports and the Coast Guard, the NSG, and all the exercise, everything is done. But just recently, when we did a sort of a review of the whole thing, we found that we were totally vulnerable to a drone attack. No preparations had been made for a drone attack. It had not been sort of thought that you could be. But now it's possible. Technology is available. And therefore, you will find that your whole system of your review of many of your critical infrastructure will also have to look at this, both in the major drone as well as the new mini drone threats which come from very local areas, need not come from even across the border. And that is a growing threat which I see in the internal security aspect. Since the other speakers will speak on other aspects of internal security, I'm not going to press on that, but I'm going to talk about what Sanjay Baru said yesterday. And for those who don't know, he was basically saying that we all knew that China was going to be a threat. It's becoming an economic power, and as the gap between India and China widened, it's going to become a major threat to us. And we knew it 22 years ago, but we really didn't take critical action to bolster our economic growth in the way that we should have to be able to at least narrow the gap slightly so that we are in a better position to tackle China. And for this, he gave a whole series of statistics, etc., to what we all know, because we are reading the newspapers, we know what is the GDP of China, what is the GDP of India, and so on and so forth. But what he didn't mention was why was the Indian state, both UPA and NDA, why are they not able to make the changes that are necessary to be able to tackle this issue, to make sure that our economic growth goes up? And I think that we don't pay enough attention to why did it not happen. And one of the reasons is because we don't want to discuss, and what I mentioned of the rule of law in the beginning, the rule of law and then the accountability. The same here when you do it in the whole economic sphere, and I'm talking of ministries like finance, commerce, and so on. Again, you have here the rule of law and then the accountability. Most people who I talk to in industry will say that one of the most important things which for an industrialist, when he makes an investment, when he sets up a plant, when he wants to do forward is he's looking for what he calls as consistency of policy. He says, when I set up this thing, I know that A, B, C, D, E, it's a 5, 10, 15, 20-year policy. I don't want changes every few months. And if you continue to make those policy changes at individual levels, individual ministers, individual secretaries, and so on and so forth, on what I call as heat of the moment decisions, you will not find the growth of industry the way you want it to be. That is the first aspect. They want consistency in policy. I'm just giving another example. You announced the reimbursement of RODTEP for industry. And then, when they made the announcement, they left out 3: pharma, steel, chemicals. Why? It's not a much great sum of money, less than 1,000 crores, that's all. But if you leave 3 sectors out, and you can give any reasons. You can say, oh, steel is doing slightly well. Not all the sectors are doing. Oh, chemical industry is doing well. Pharma is doing slightly well, and so on. Therefore, I don't give. But what you're doing, this is reimbursement of duties and taxes which are getting exported. And taxes are not to be exported. It's WTO. You don't export taxes. So you're reimbursing the taxes inbuilt. And that makes them globally competitive if you reimburse taxes, which every other country in the world is doing it. So when you leave these ad hoc decisions, people who are planning for this, because they all came and gave their statistics and their figures, whether it's 1% or 2% or 1.5%, it's suddenly they factored that into their pricing and into their thing, and then suddenly it's not there because somebody at the last minute decides, let's not give these 3 sectors. And this is a major aspect which I think the consistency of policy across. The second major aspect in terms of what we call economic growth and making sure this is that when you take economic decisions, whether it is like, say, implementation of GST, please think through what is the impact on the ground of many people, many industries. The implementation of GST, good decision. Very good that GST came into India. It created, I think it improved a lot of productivity, etc. But the major benefits went to the much larger players. The MSME and the small scale sector was extremely badly hit. To tell you the fact, it's an additional cost to them. And especially for those who are in the manufacturing and the export business, and I give you a very simple example, because it happened to be in the state of Gujarat and a cotton ginning factory where we visited to see the impact of GST on. We want to please tell us how you are making those GST statements and tabulations and so on. He said, I can't tell you. Why? We asked him why. And he said, because my accountant has taken the hard drive and gone to Ahmedabad to consult a chartered accountant on how to file the return. So you can imagine, it's just 40 kilometers from the state capital, and a small means about 20, 25 crores business, guy is not able to do that, an additional cost. And therefore, the GST impact has hit many of the small players who could not comply with the requirements, and the big players who are also part of the supply chain will not take orders from him because he doesn't have a GST registration. He's not able to, he makes a small mistake, and the GST system was so inflexible that if you made one error once, you had to wait for the next cycle after 3 months, etc. Until that time, you were liable for prosecution. The claim was not reimbursed, etc. So what happens is, when you make that policy decision, just think through at the grassroots level, A, B, C, D, E, F, what are all the things that need to, and if the small and medium industries needed a little bit of financial holding, you could have said, I'm reimbursing you for your costs of having to hire a chartered accountant for 1 year. It would have helped many of these small-scale and medium-scale industries to have survived. Many of them have actually lost their complete business. I'm not talking about the handicraft sectors and so on and so forth, because it's a total The GST became it's a nightmare for them. They just lost their jobs completely because brassware in Moradabad is, again, dependent on so many people working from different households, and we didn't have that. None of them keep the records. People just go. There are tekadars who go and give you 2 kilograms of silver and come back after 3 days and collect the whatever articles you make of brass or silver, etc. And they don't keep any records. If you ask them to keep records, and they say it doesn't work at all. That's how the informal sector really works. The last point which I wanted to mention is is trade as a major policy, because I've worked in the Ministry of Commerce, been negotiating a WTO and so on. Trade is used, it is another, shall I say, another army in the arsenal of countries. And countries use trade and what I call trade measures, in a variety of measures to protect their national interest. And we don't do it. We think we want to be moral, I'll give you an example. No Indian meat could be exported to Indonesia. They said, your quality is not good. We said, no, but we got all the certificates. They said, no, still not. Then when we discovered the trace behind it, we found it's the Australian meat industry which has completely bribed the Agriculture Department of Indonesia. And you'll be surprised is how could they bribe them. Every single son or daughter of those agriculture ministry, I got a scholarship in Australia. We had to do our own. We hired consultants to find out this. Of course, there's always a way out of it. Because we had ASEAN FTA, we shipped our meat to Malaysia, and from Malaysia it went to Indonesia. So you can bypass all the tricks which Australia is doing too. Japan had. You could export all your pharmacy, your generic medicines to Japan. But they had a government circular saying that no doctor in Japan shall prescribe generic medicines. So, please export as much generic medicines to Japan as after 3 years, the time expired, you had to bring it back again. And we had to then move with Japan to get this government circular removed as part of the Comprehensive Economic Cooperation Agreement with Japan. So trade is used, and we have to use that trade. And whenever it's in commerce, the ASEAN FTA, the South Korean FTA, the Japan's SICA, the Singapore, and so on, all of these. And then somehow we again come back, there's that consistency of policy. We suddenly back, and I know Mr. Mishri said, we are all now looking at self-reliance, and therefore we want to again close all our borders, etc. But keep your options open, because unless you go out, unless you negotiate, unless you are in the room, what we call as in the room with where the negotiations take place, maybe a small group, maybe a large group, maybe an even larger group. Unless you are there, you will not know what is happening, and you will not be able to, shall I say, put your views across and get it. And that is what happened during the Uruguay round. We said, we are not there. And finally, we had to accept the entire Uruguay round discussions without really having contributed anything to that. And I think this consistency of policy, and trade is war by other means. Every country uses it. You name it. And it's all quid pro quo, Bush, Harley Davidson motorcycle, and mango. It's Bush's Bumchum was the president of Harley Davidson, so he's doing him a favor. Bush so-called doing, and it's a trade-off which we all will do. So there's really, it's something which you have to do. Even with the Chinese, when we suddenly put anti-dumping duties on some issue on Chinese, the whole Chinese delegation just came down and said, and I remember the Chinese trade secretary came and said, please take away this, we'll buy $300 million worth of goods from India straight away, just as a starting for the discussions itself. So with this huge imbalance between India and China, this is something which you have to use to find. Otherwise, you'll find like basmati rice, 18 years the Chinese are doing pest risk analysis for Indian basmati rice. And we sell it through 100 countries in Europe and the rest of the world, but China still will not allow basmati rice because they are still doing pest risk analysis. It's part of, so you can do the same thing here. Okay, time is up. But this is what I said, this consistency of policy, making sure that you follow through on every economic decision, what are the impact, and make that impact, that financial cost, easing for the industrialist or the trader or the exporter, and then being as open to trade, because I still believe that we are in, you may say, slightly de-globalized, but we still need that. You're not going to get rid of any of these global supply chains very quickly. We still need to be engaged in the world, and therefore we need to keep ourselves as open as possible. Thank you.
May I now request Mr. Ajay Sahni to give his presentation.
Thank you, Mr. Haldar, fellow panelists, a very distinguished gathering. Thank you also for the opportunity, General Patankar, the Pune Institute for, the Pune International Center, for this opportunity to speak here. I am going to focus within a very large, I think, canvas on a few small issues, essentially relating to internal security. I'd like to emphasize first a handful of thematics that I think are most important. One, of course, is a certain conflicting trend around us, which seems to be relatively little understood, of a dramatic decline in terrorism, and yet an environment in which insecurity appears to flourish. I will not go into too much of data, we are short of time, but let me tell you that as far as terrorism is concerned, at peak in 2001, in India, terrorism and insurgency, Northeast, the Maoists, and of course Jammu and Kashmir, the three major live theaters of terrorism insurgency, the total fatalities were at 5,500 in 2001. This year, we've had 384 fatalities till November 22nd. Understand the tremendous drop that has occurred in terrorism, and yet we have a sense, first, of insecurity, and second, of constant hysteria every time a couple of incidents occur. Terrorism is, number one, no longer a major threat to national security. It is a threat. Incidents can occur. The other thing that we do not understand as far as terrorism is concerned is that almost every major terrorist movement, I would not say almost, every major terrorist movement in the post-World War II era has actually had state support. Every single movement, go through all of them and you will see that at some stage or the other, the state may thereafter, this may be an external state, it may be the host state itself. So rather than constantly talking about movement A or movement B or movement C, or Lashkar-e-Taiba and Jaish-e-Mohammed and Hizbul Mujahideen, we should be talking about the state sponsors of terrorism and directing. No doubt we have to keep on fighting on the ground. But it is the failure to address the issue of state sponsorship that is, to my mind, the gravest failure in our counterterrorism policies. Another issue which feeds this insecurity that we are currently experiencing is an aggressive hyper-nationalism. I think Mr. Pillai also spoke of this. This is feeding the insecurities of the minorities. It is feeding into an extremely violent environment, even though the manifest violence may not be of any very great magnitude. The sense of threat is enveloping. This is fed by the polarizing politics. That is, we are constantly in a state of elections, one either at the state level, local level, or national level. And the principal principal mechanism for electoral mobilization today has become polarization, communal, caste, regional, linguistic, whatever. Whatever works locally is what is used. We also have an entrenched ruler-rule dichotomy. We were speaking, Mr. Pillai spoke of the rule of law. We no longer have so much of the, we no longer have the, we've, I suspect, not had a very strong rule of law culture at any stage in our history, post-independence history. But we are now in a situation where we have almost complete and arbitrary rule of the ruler. And the problem with this is not merely that we have a tyranny or an evolving tyranny. It is the great acceptance of this pattern of rule by the elites, by those who are governing us. Large proportions of the population not only accept but justify this pattern of governance against all constitutional norms. And with this has gone the tremendous erosion of institutional autonomy, the constitutional division of powers, and the utter and complete subordination of state institutions to partisan political ends everywhere. State governments are doing it. The center is manifestly doing it. This, of course, results in an erosion of public trust, both locally, domestically, and globally. I'm afraid we are no longer the India we were a decade and a half ago, in the eyes of our own people and in the eyes of the world. We have also to understand, and everyone is speaking of the global environment, and we are talking about the global, the changes in global, and this will be the core of what I will come to. Sanjay Baru spoke of it. Mr. Mishri also spoke of it. It has been alluded to by Mr. Pillai as well. Something that is not being emphasized adequately to my mind is the sheer urgency. Mr. Mishri spoke of, I think, that this is an epical transformation. But this is not an epical transformation of the nature that we have undergone earlier. It is an epical transformation which is occurring in the months and the years, not in the decades and the centuries. And this is what I will emphasize most importantly. Finally, I would like to, among the broad trends that I'm speaking of, I'm going to emphasize the criticality of internal security over all other threats. I mean, this is not to suggest that India is anywhere close to a disintegration or a crisis. I don't think India. We've been talking about Pakistan disintegrating for the last, I think, 25 years, and it's nowhere near disintegration. So be assured that I'm not talking about or suggesting any risk of a disintegration in India, but merely as a point of how important internal security is. Of 39 countries that have disintegrated after World War II, only 5 were the result of external aggression. 34 were due to internal factors. And this is something we must keep in mind when we are talking about internal security. We also need to understand what are the sinews of state power. We're talking about GDP, we're talking about military might, we talk about buying a few planes from some country and now we are secure, or we've bought a few other defense technologies from some other country and we are now secure. The sinews of state power historically have depended on a chain, which culminates, it is variously expressed, but it culminates in the military-industrial complex. The military-industrial complex, Dr. Mashelkar made a very modest claim, or rather assertion, regarding the importance of scientists and science. But the military-industrial complex is based on technology. Technology is based on science. Science is based on education. And all these are based on the human resource profile of the country. On all this, every link of this chain in this country is rotten. You can give me wonderful examples. ISRO is doing fantastic work, such and such institution, such and such IITs are doing great. Yes. What is the population proportion they cater to? We have 26% of our population in higher education, of the age group which is in higher education, should be in higher education, 26% of the population. It's gone up enormously. It used to be 8 to 10% at one, not more than, I think, 15 to 18 years ago. So it's gone up to 26%. In the West, this ratio is almost never under 50%, goes up to 75%. And all Western countries are net importers of intellectual manpower. Please understand that. And the quality of education in this country, which is a completely different thing, we talk about millions of graduates. I remember a 2012 study by NASSCOM and CII, which said that 26% of engineers and 10% of general university graduates are suitable for employment in the business sector. So we are just, and privatization hasn't helped over here. Mr. Haldar spoke about we are going to be in a state of war. He also suggested that many of the phenomena that constitute a state of war are already in play. And this is what we must understand, that our national sovereignty is being consistently eroded, even today. You have to ask yourself, what is the meaning of sovereignty? It is, according to one definition, the power of a nation to stop others from interfering in its internal affairs. We made a decision after Galwan that we would boycott Chinese goods. Each year after that, our imports have spiraled. Spiraled, not by 2% or 5%, but by 30% and 45%. What is this except the failure or inability or the absence of the power required to implement the decisions that you believe to be in the national interest? A reference has already been made to cyber threats. This is not just about extortion or hacking or that kind of thing by individual and small groups. This is about an assault on your securities of the state. Today, I just give you a handful of examples. Since October 2021, the Indian petroleum refinery work has faced 3.6 lakh attacks. The Nuclear Power Corporation of India blocks over 10 targeted attacks a day. In May 2021, Air India data servers were targeted by a cyber attack. Large quantities of data was stolen. Cyber attacks, you would understand, are now physical, can be physical. Not merely attacking your computers, but attacking the systems your computers control. The classic example is the Stuxnet virus, which virtually collapsed the Iranian nuclear power program because it engendered an attack on the centrifuges, overheating of the centrifuges. I think the 10th of all centrifuges burnt out. Since the June 2020 Galwan attack, while the Galwan attack was ongoing, there were 40,300 attempts to inject malware in the Indian networks, coinciding with the Galwan attack. In October 12, 2020, there was a cyber attack against the Mumbai power station, which resulted in a breakdown. In April 2020, there was a cyber attack on the Ladakh power grid. Now, these have not caused major disruption. Mr. Pillai, I think, mentioned that these are little probes. They're testing our systems to see how much damage they can do when they want to do that damage. And our systems are enormously vulnerable. We talk about smart cities. But I understand that there was an intentional cost assessment, as a result of which security was eliminated from the investment into the smart city. So you have smart, if at all we have smart cities, we have increasingly interconnected, increasing interconnectivity, but I don't think any of our cities is anywhere close to smart. We are now also at a cusp of a transformation in economic systems. Essentially, technology has become the principal factor. Karl Marx, and I am not a Marxist before you jump to that conclusion, but Karl Marx has a lovely phrase. He said, the more useful things you have, the more useless people you have. And that is the world we are moving into, a world of useless people. 85 million jobs are projected to be lost globally by 2030, a very short span of time. You can already envisage a world where human physical labor will be as redundant as animal labor is today. And that was the central source of power, no more than about, say, a century and a half ago. That was the principal source of power. Are we beginning to even contend with this potential crisis? Are we even recognizing this potential crisis? I would like to suggest we aren't. We have moved from what I call idiot socialism to idiot capitalism. Neither of them was actually understood in any great depth. Mr. Haldar always accuses me of impoliteness. I will continue to be impolite. There is no capitalist society in the world. The degree to which America subsidizes and underpins its critical sectors. They have a clear theory, and this should have resonance in India also. They spoke of command technologies. All major technological development globally has been state-backed and state-led, and has principally been in its first stages in the defense sector. We have stood that entire thing on its head. We now think we are going to become a capitalist society, give away everything to the private sector, and everything will be all right. And this is the problem with ideological thinking. Evidence doesn't matter. It doesn't matter till the system breaks down. And so we are seeing this private sector fail again and again, succeed also. But we learn no lessons from the failure. Because our ideological structure says capitalism good, socialism bad. And that roughly is the level at which the actual policy understanding goes. Both socialism and capitalism are based on a land-labor technology dynamic. They're both analyses of a system in which land, labor, and capital are the factors of production. Today, labor is an progressively marginalizing factor of production. Land is also a progressively marginalizing factor of production. The first factor of production now is technology. Capital follows. If you have the technology, money will come. So in a world of technology, capital, economics, we are still stuck with a dogma which has lost its relevance and are not even beginning to address the problem of correcting our positions and the policy distortions that will come from these positions. I would like to suggest that we should pay enormous attention to China's elaboration of the idea of unrestricted warfare. This is based on their protracted war model. The idea is that you attack in a slow, eroding system, attack the sinews of the adversary system till you have transformed its strengths into a weakness or have exploited its weaknesses to the greatest extent. I would like to suggest that we are already in this state. It doesn't matter whether this is China's intention or not, but basically, as far as China is concerned, it has reduced our entire industrial sector to a essentially screwdriver technology sector. We have, I think, something like 196 cell phones which are supposed to be Indian manufacturers. 7% value added. That is what we are doing. Basically, we are repackaging Chinese goods. What is this doing? We have a 0.6%. You spoke about allocations to certain sectors in science. We have a 0.6% GDP being expended on research and development. China today accounts for 23% of the world's R&D spending, 23%, single country. So while we may celebrate small elements, and while we may celebrate the profits we are making from imports from China or from elsewhere, what we are basically doing is celebrating our own inevitable decline and a collapse of the system. And I do not believe we have more than a decade or so, because the new economics is going to transform the world into two sectors. They are going to be what I call the countries of technology, and they are going to be the extractive economies, suppliers of basic commodities. We are already in that direction. If you see our exports, more and more they are dominated by ores or petroleum, or not petroleum, but extractives, basically extraction, ores and other natural resources. 2 minutes, okay. And finally, I'd like to address something that nobody is very willing to speak openly about. I call it the dinosaur in the room. The decisive failure of the Indian system lies at the apex of where the constitutional power is concentrated. Politics today has been completely undermined, completely corrupted. I'd like to share with you some numbers. 42% of the present Union Council of Ministers appointed in July 2021 have criminal charges against them. 31% of these are for what are called serious crimes. Minimum punishment of more than 6 years. 43% of the current Lok Sabha has criminal charges against them, 29% for serious crimes. Some of the states, the situation is much worse. The worst state is Bihar, with 72% of ministers, 53% of cases of ministers having serious crime. All India, the average for the state assemblies is 35% of all legislators in the states have criminal charges against them. Now, you can keep talking about all the wonderful things India will do, but if the principal decision-making is located, and correctly located, after all, they are the ones who are winning elections, they are the ones answerable to the people. But if decision-making continues to be located in a completely criminalized political elite, I see very little hope of rational decision-making. And that is what we are seeing manifested across the country today in what we were talking about earlier as the polarizing politics, the communal mobilization or caste mobilization, and a whole range of extremely deleterious practices centered in the politics of this country. Thank you very much.
After Mr. Sahni is rather explosive and passionate, this thing, may I request Gurbachan Jagat ji to you also have 20 minutes. Sir.
Dr. Mashelkar, Dr. Kelkar, distinguished colleagues, after hearing the flights of intellectual talk by Dr. Ajay Sahni and the plain speaking by Mr. Pillai, you'll get to hear a policeman's story about the policeman's problems. I was in the police for a long time in Punjab and then in J&K, then the Border Security Force and finally in Manipur. I still retain that loyalty to my force, and I would like to explain the difficulties that the police force faces when it's doing its duties. Mr. Pillai very rightly mentioned the rule of law. I have seen over long years, 50 years, the rule of law is decreasing day by day. And I'll talk only of the police, not the other departments, but it's the same case everywhere. That we follow the dictates of the ruling party. Before coming to those details, I'll just mention, because I want to show how the police, when called upon to do serious duties regarding internal security, will not be able to perform those duties. Because all its professionalism, all its integrity have been taken away in the course of the last 50, 60 years. And it is increasing day by day. When we talk of internal security, we talk of various things: climate, economy, energy, territorial integrity. Everything is there. And it's a fact that whether they are natural disasters or whether they are man-made problems, normally the first responders are the police force. Later on, specialized people do come over there. Now, I'll just digress for a moment and talk about what happened in Ukraine. Everybody saw the war coming. NATO was pushing it. The Americans were pushing it. Russia was also doing its bit. But everybody expected a war for a long time, and I think they prepared sufficiently for it. And the Ukrainians, with the help of the NATO and Americans, did a good job on the battlefield. But what happened in the hinterland? What is happening there today? They had no idea at all that their entire energy systems, their entire thermal plants, their nuclear plants, their electrical systems were going to be destroyed. In this coming winter, that country is going to face such a huge human tragedy that words will not be able to explain it. But that thinking never entered the minds of the NATO generals or the Ukrainian generals or anyone else. Not at that point of time, but earlier on, to put in place systems for the protection of your essential services. That is why we also have to learn a lesson from that and ensure that we do not keep on talking about the LAC and the LOC all the time and see whether our basic important systems are properly guarded either against physical attacks or cyber attacks. But I'm sure some thinking is needed in this regard. Otherwise, we'll be left with a few victories at the LAC and may get totally demolished in the hinterland. Now, coming to the first responders, that is the police. Over the years, the internal administration of the police has been totally taken over by the political executive. And when we talk of reforms, there are officers who have gone up to the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court has also passed orders which have been duly noted by the state governments. I also, as DG of J&K Police, signed an affidavit that these are being implemented. But implementation on the ground is almost zero. And why talk of only police reforms? Police is a part of the criminal justice system, which consists of the executive, the judiciary, and the police. Why don't we talk of the executive and the judiciary also? I'm sure that very few of you might have had a chance to go to a police station or to go to a lower judicial court or go to lower block level executive offices. That is where the common man has to go every day. He has to meet his local police station chap. He has to meet the local revenue patwari. He has to meet the block development officer. Nothing happens over there unless you pay for it. Now even Sifarish doesn't work. So everybody searches for a conduit to reach the officer concerned. I have always maintained that developmental work costs money, needs funds. Good governance doesn't need any money. It is one man in the state, I am talk of the states, it is the Chief Minister of the state who has to make up his mind that he's going to run an honest, efficient administration. And as far as the police is concerned, he has to pick the right Director General of Police, and on the civil side, the right Chief Secretary, and then give a free hand to them in their internal administration. But what is happening actually? The DGs, even after the Supreme Court orders and the UPSC panels and all, the governments, the states are getting around them. In Punjab, in the last 6 months, we have had 3 DGs. So is the case with other places also. If nothing else works, they prepare a charge sheet against the approved DG and ask him that either resign or go on deputation. Otherwise, this charge sheet is coming. So they get their officers of choice at the top, they get their district collectors and district superintendents of police, and they get their station house officers and patwaris. So there is a total takeover of the police administration and the civil administration. And it is totally politicalized. In Punjab, they went so far as to try to align state assembly constituencies with police stations and police districts so that they could appoint MLAs as in charge unofficially of those areas. And people were posted to those places according to their choices. This is happening everywhere. It is not that Punjab police or Punjab civil administration has been taken over. I saw the same thing in Manipur. J&K was totally a different ball game. There we had relative freedom. General Patlingar was also there. And we managed to do things because of the support of the MHA that we got. Being the situation, so if tomorrow we have a serious internal security problem, and I slightly disagree with my friend Dr. Sahni that there is no major internal security problem pending. I have my doubts about the situation in J&K. What appears in the papers and what one hears from the ground are two different things. And as we were talking of alienation, it was being talked about for the whole country. You can imagine what it is over there. To give one example, when I was there, I left in 2000. what is called downtown, which was the stronghold of the militants, we had about 29 companies posted over there. Today I have been told there are 58. And the presence all over the city and the state is absolutely huge. And coming again to how this will be tackled, and again in the northeast, the movement is still there. And what we have called, like I'll give one example, the Nagaland ceasefire and the Nagaland peace talks. I don't know what happened in those talks because I have never been involved in any talks anyway. But for all these years of the ceasefire, it was ruled, that area was state was ruled by the Naga underground. There was no government worth the name. A whole city has come up on the border between Manipur and Nagaland, in which the best of houses and industries have come up, mainly owned by politicians and Naga underground. And any time that the Nagas want to, then it happened 3 or 4 times during my tenure, they just closed 2 roads to Manipur, put up barricades, and Manipur stops getting any supplies from outside. But they are prepared, they know this is happening, they have rations for 3 months. And the underground on both sides charges all transport going on those 2 roads. On this side the Nagas, on that side the Manipuri underground. And in these states, the system is so fine-tuned that if the budget comes, it is known that this much will go to the Chief Minister and his cabinet colleagues. They take good care of the opposition also. Some of it goes to the opposition also, and some of it goes to the underground also. If recruitment takes place even to the police, it is on the same basis. Each MLA is given a certain number. Each opposition MLA is also given. And the underground is also given a number of positions to get them in recruited. So I have my doubts about the Northeast also, and the Maoist, that is one place where we feel that we are doing well. But on the other hand, when Dr. Sahni and Mr. Pillai pointed out, and everybody else also, Dr. Baru also, that the economy is going downhill. If that is correct, then how is insurgency or how is law and order going to be kept intact? It is tied up to the people's conditions. You have financial reforms, you have other things, but social reforms have not taken place at all. Our communal divisions, our caste divisions are stronger than ever before. And these fault lines can be exploited by outsiders, they can be exploited by people inside who feel that they're not getting a fair deal. So I would say that if we expect the police to be the first responder and do something really good, we are asking for the moon. The police is not capable of it anywhere in the country, except even in normal crime situations. Everywhere there's an explosion of crime. The beginning of our service, we never heard of rapes, we never heard of murders and murders in which the bodies are sliced into 35 pieces. There used to be crime, but we dealt mainly with robberies and thefts and burglaries and things of that kind. But now it is a headline news every day. The rapes and murders and multiple murders have become so common because, number one, people are not caught. As has been pointed out percentage-wise, how many criminals are there in our assemblies and parliament and in our ministries, and how many of them have patronage within our services, especially the police and the civil services. And then the investigation levels, the prosecution levels, the judicial levels have gone down so low that the conviction rates I have nothing to talk about. So this is the situation generally. And the only places where we have got success, like in J&K, and that was due to very close cooperation between the army and the paramilitary forces and the police. We had what were called special operation groups. And the best thing was that the intelligence came from the local police. Whether it was Punjab or it was J&K or it is the Maoist areas, the police is the single unit which can provide operational intelligence because they belong to the area. The militants also belong to the area. They know each other. They know each other's language, the culture, whereas the other forces come to in the area for 2 years or 3 years, not knowing the language, not knowing the culture, and go back after 2 years. So it is this combination which worked, and this is what needs to be done even now everywhere across. And our British time rules provide for all these things. Columns in every district are identified to assist the police in aid of civil power. Other gazetteers are there for every contingency, floods, droughts, everything. When we joined service, we had drills which were conducted for anti-flood measures led by financial commissioners actually on the ground. The other thing that I wanted to mention was that we must strengthen not only the police as an institution, but all other institutions also. And one institution that is most important, that is the parliament at the center and the state assemblies. We are no longer hearing the debates that we used to hear in the times of Bhupesh Gupta or Hiran Mukherjee or Feroz Gandhi or Atal Bihari Vajpayee. I can't think of a single speaker now except for the Prime Minister, who really does well in parliamentary debates. Parliament is the forum from where the news should come, from where the laws should come, and the people should be told what is happening. Today, most of us don't even know what's happening in the country, except from press handouts or from half-baked news. But we don't get news from the parliament. We don't get news from the state assemblies. We have to strengthen these things, and we have to strengthen all our institutions. Institutionally, we have gone backwards. Our institutions are not now delivering what they ought to have delivered. And finally, to sum up, we need to liberate the police force. I belong to the police, from the stranglehold of the political executive, and so also the other institutions. Unless the institutions are allowed to function, we cannot move forward, because the institutions are the strength of the country. Individuals cannot replace institutions. You might not like the present institution, replace it with another institution, that is all right. But there should be an institution. With these words, I conclude and thank you all for a patient listening.
Thank you, sir. Okay. Thank you, sir. And before I open the floor to the audience, two things I would add. One is that since he mentioned about various things, we certainly cannot criticize or question the wisdom of the judiciary, but I would refer our audience to the latest Frontline, where a High Court judge has lamented about the knowledge that is lacking in the judiciary itself, including the bar. So I think that would be an eye-opener. I do not want to get into that.
Not only knowledge integrity, also the lower judiciary.
So the question is that I would refer, so this is where we are there. And it's accumulated decades of problem. It's not a problem which has arisen in a day or a last 5-6 years. It is something which has come round to us in a, if I can use a word of Hindi, virasat mein, I have for decades now. Second thing that I refer to, I think you referred to about the word war that I had written. That war was a different war I meant, that we have so many grievances, so many fault lines, and that will be exploited by the adversary to generate something like of a dissent-based argument and clashes. So, and that we have seen already happening in some places in the country. This is what I want. Now I would invite questions to any of the panelists. Please, Mr. Kem Singh.
Hello. K.M. Singh from Policy Perspective Foundation. I have two issues to mention. One is to supplement what Mr. Jagat mentioned. He shared his concern about situation in J&K. I agree that things are not so honky-dory as it looks like. In one of our recent visits to Srinagar, about 2-3 weeks ago, when I talked to some of the people, a new disconcerting thing came to notice, and that is, while the people have reconciled by and large to abolition of Article 370, they have not reconciled at all to downgrading the status of J&K from a state to Union territory. And the implication is that, leave aside the Muslims in the state, Hindus in Jammu also are, I feel, totally alienated. They feel that they have been insulted. So, in a sensitive state like J&K, further alienation of even Hindus may be a matter of concern for future. That's an issue I wanted to mention. But I have a question to Mr. Ajay Sahni. And the very first issue that you touched is about terrorism. And probably you mentioned that there has been some decline in terrorism in the last few years. My perception is that we have been the victim of Pak-sponsored terrorism. And there has been definitely some decline. And I feel that's primarily because of the constraints that Pakistan has because of FATF. And they were keen to come out to demonstrate to people who matter, agencies who matter, that yes, they have come heavily on the terrorism, and it's no longer, they are no longer sponsors. But 2-3 months ago, Pakistan is now out of the shackles of FATA. So I would like to ask Mr. Ajay Sahni, that do you think that this change now will have, or will give further impetus once again to terrorism in India in general and J&K in particular? Thank you.
Much of the decline in terrorism in Jammu and Kashmir and Islamist terrorism across the country, excluding the Maoist and the Northeast, has been the result of explicit Pak sponsorship, support, enormous resourcing, training, safe haven. This has definitely come under pressure globally, not only by the FATF, but because of the international attention that has been placed on Pakistan, the continuous scrutiny, the recognition, first and foremost. You must understand that this entire idea of terrorism, I think Mr. Mishri mentioned that we don't have a consensual definition of terrorism. The reason is not that it's so difficult to define terrorism. The reason is that states don't want to define terrorism. My terrorist is a freedom fighter, your terrorist is a terrorist. So they did not, the West did not acknowledge Kashmir as an issue of terrorism till 2001. It was an internal security issue, it was an insurgency, it was a rebellion. It was only after 2001 that they started acknowledging that this was part of the same continuum that created 9/11 in America. And then the pressure started. Pakistan also has other pressures, economic, political. So perhaps they do not at this juncture have the resources to absorb the reaction that would come to a significant escalation of terrorism. But they haven't given up. Not only in Jammu and Kashmir, you see continuous efforts to revive terrorism in Punjab. You see daily, almost daily droppings of weapons and also drugs, which is, to my mind, another pattern of assault that they have engineered in Punjab. So they haven't changed their positions or their long-term intent, but their capacities to revive terrorism to the levels that it was that existed at one point of time no longer exist. It's only if they are able to pull themselves out of their own difficulties. FATF alone will not make a difference. FATF never made a difference. I mean, they did want to come out, but FATF didn't really exercise any enormous constraint on investment or economy. Blacklisting would have made a difference. The grey list is just a nominal thing that continues indefinitely.
So, I'm General Gadkari, I'm from CAS. And I have two questions, and I don't know which one is more important, so I'll address both of them. Anyone in the panel could probably address it. And probably this is a question which must be haunting everybody's mind today. Everyone has spoken about the political dominance in the country today and its relationship to national security. Given the fact that the political scenario today is all about electioneering and retaining power at any cost, how is it possible, or how does a professional body influence decision-making in its perspective towards national security when there are other constraints or other influences that are forced upon him? And this probably is the most challenging thing that is in existence today for any professional or a professional institution. The panel has already addressed that, so anyone can answer that. And my second question is to Honorable former Governor. Police is a state subject. Is there a point in case, police, as you say, is the first responder. Army is not the first responder as far as internal security is concerned. Is there a point in case of making police, at least on, or bringing police on the concurrent list? If it is, what challenges do we face by doing it? Because making it a central list is out of question. Thank you.
So far as your second question is concerned, there is already a demand that the police should be brought onto the concurrent list, but there are some states which do not agree with this suggestion, so it will take time before they can be brought around, but it has already been mooted. That's where the second stage is. The first stage, government can be convinced only by the various structures that are in place. One of the structures at the apex level is that of the National Security Advisory Board. Similarly, there are other prominent individuals who can sort of take it up. So the government will also have its own viewpoint and assessment, and they have a right to have that. Because in a democracy, when a government comes to power, it comes along with its power. The views that we are expressing, it is our apprehension that if we do not slow down this process, we didn't say it, he talked of domination. We didn't talk of domination. We said that there is a successive failures add up to a bigger calamity. This is what, if you look at the various conflicts which from decent degenerated into massive movements, Tahrir Square or even in, what is that? Algeria, and several other countries. So this is where we are trying to caution that we need to keep in attention that when a series of unconnected tension points arise, dissent accumulates, then what will trigger, you cannot predict, but something might trigger. And then you have very unlikely combinations coming together. And so that is the challenge we are looking at.
Regarding bringing police on the concurrent list, I won't say anything about that, but the center-state relations are already not very happy relationships. Most of the states have their own grouses. Maybe it is GST, maybe it is sharing of financial resources or something else. But center-state relationships are fraught with many disagreements and apprehensions. And I think if you take away the police or bring it on the... Already things are happening. The CBI is there. They have offices everywhere. Now NIA is going to establish offices in all the states. So indirectly, things are happening. Directly, if it is brought onto the concurrent list, I don't know how the states will really take that. Thank you.
So may I just have one line? Yeah. On the concurrent list, one point that I'd like to add to what Mr. Jagat has said. Are you very satisfied with the performance of institutions under the center?
Well, I don't think that the protocol allows a question from the panel to the audience, so you need not answer. Please.
I cannot question even one part of what all the panelists have said. But I want to create a scenario for you to answer. I'm a 25-year-old entering college, reading the daily news. Within the panelists, please give me one reason why I should be optimistic. I have enough reasons why I should not be optimistic. With what we are seeing today, why should we be optimistic? Unless I get that, the problems will only multiply again and again, and they'll manifest in many forms. And nothing of what you have said is contestable. But I still want to be optimistic. One point. Thank you.
The spirit of India, sir.
Manifested in what?
Manifested in still that we have crime committed by a smaller section, sir. Rest of the sections are certainly not committed. Whether it is the minority or whether it is the majority, it is a minor section. So there is something going wrong with the management on the ground where who should have been picked up right in the beginning, we are not able to pick up. You need probably to look at your laws. We are taking some prominent fellow, keeping him, who can create trouble, keeping him for 3 months, 4 months without giving any evidence.
3 years, 4 years, sir.
And then what happens is that the court says, you have not proved this case, so I am releasing. So this doesn't add to the credit. So it is instead, we look at the way we, this thing, you can keep a person in his own house. Now they were objecting in one case, they were objecting also to the house itself. Suppose you have, one decides to keep a prisoner who is basically a hutment dweller. Then you will say he has got no security at his hutment, so he cannot be even allowed to go back to this thing. These are illogicalities which are entering. And I do not think it's the government is responsible for it. It is the overzealous implementation of law. So that is what needs to be tackled. Please.
I'm Prakash Apte from PIC. A lot has been talked about the implementation of the rule of law and the difficulties in implementing the laws with because of the police corruption, weaknesses in investigation, etc. But there is one more party here which was very briefly mentioned, and that is judiciary. I think it is the average citizen's experience that judiciary is also deeply corrupted, particularly at the lower levels. Gives illogical and inexplainable decisions and reasons for many times, which is the reason why a citizen does not get justice, through the normal course, apart from the investigation. And they have an opaque system of selection, of the people who sit at the helm of the affairs. And they are not willing to sort of open up or give any transparency on merits or otherwise to that. And everybody does not want to talk about it. We recently had a Chief Justice who is only 74 days tenure. And same Supreme Court sits and says that various other constitutional positions must have a minimum tenure, because otherwise they cannot really contribute substantially. And why judiciary is treated so much as a holy cow in our democracy?
Is that your question?
Yes. How can we? Why it is not also a threat to our internal security?
This has to come by a consensus, because right now we follow a convention that judiciary we keep out of such discussions, because even now the level of corruption probably is lower than that. That is the perception. That I may be wrong absolutely, or I may be absolutely wrong on the other side. I do not know. So I would say that we keep this out of the present this thing. I mean, he is venturing there. So
No, I mentioned it in an oblique manner that we talk only of police reforms, whereas police is a part of the criminal justice system, which includes the judiciary and the executive. And why no talk about that? Because I'll mince no words. I'll talk at least about the judiciary in the districts and the judiciary at the state level. There's immense amounts of corruption, but that is not talked about. The talked about one is the fellow in uniform who starts the whole process. But the conviction rates, the acquittal rates, the bails, everything, bails given at night time, even in the house by senior judges, all that happens. Not at all. Judiciary is no saint, and we don't have to treat it as such. I think if there are faults, we should discuss them. And they are part of the criminal justice system.
Okay. I may just, I refer to that frontline article, because that it will give you some conditions. That itself says that they have a judicial academy in Bhopal. The Supreme Court, all the Supreme Court judges had to go there because they could not persuade the High Court judges to undergo the training. So they went there for 1 day's seminar just to prove that this is necessary. And they have also been commenting in their own judgments, Supreme Court judgments, that you must know the law, because some of the people giving High Court judgments, etc., have not shown awareness of that law. So it is Supreme Court's own observation. So there is no contest about it.
It is an important arm of our entire structure, and we cannot afford to, ignore the degeneration in that. Even if we make improvements on all the other factors which we talked about just now, we will still be vulnerable if this arm is not strengthened.
This is a decision that the government of India will take. I don't think there is any, even now, there is any constraint on government of India if they want to send the force back to Assam. There is none. And there should be none. That is clear.
Two things here. You must understand that unless you invest in these institutions, no reform is going to work. If you go to the lower court, you will see each magistrate sitting with a docket of 150 cases in front of him. When you burden or overburden any system or individual, you cannot hold him to account. That is where discretion comes in, therefore corruption comes in. Similarly, the police. Do you know how much we spend per capita on the state police? 1 rupee 94 paisa per capita population per day. So if you, to be a little rude about this, if you pay peanuts, you get monkeys.
Thank you. I think,
Kamro Deshmukh.
yeah, please.
I just wanted to know, there is a positive signs of the external interference in our internal policies. There are comments which come very strongly that democracy is deteriorating. Democracy deteriorating. There is also a comment that freedom of expression as well as the freedom of religion is being affected. Now, aren't these comments which come so strongly, which are being internally supported, increase the passion which is coming up and which gives the, fire to the passions between the groups? And we haven't spoken about this particular aspect. What is the opinion of the panel? How do we control this interference, sir? Thank you.
See, the comments being made by independent entities from outside, you can only have a counter this thing, which is, I think there are a number of foreign service officers present here. They would be able to say, because we can only tell you about the danger that it might cause. It might just provoke something into our this thing. It's a tinderbox situation that we are dealing with inside the country.
See, it is a fact that there are many agencies external to India which also would like to see India, I don't want to say disintegrate, but put India in a bad position. Now, it is our job to make sure that we counter those. And it's not just enough to counter those, it's also necessary for us to be able to do things here so that less of that criticism comes out. So it is important. I fully agree, there are vested interests who will try to damage India's reputation. But we have to also make sure that that part of it, we have to take care of it. Ministry of External Affairs will take care of it, Ministry of Home Affairs will take care of it. But we should not allow, because finally it is our country. We should not allow a situation to develop. I mean, you mentioned, what are the sort of instances. We have to be careful, and one of the reasons why we are saying is, the warning signs are there. If you see earlier when this whole, the Khalistan movement came, everybody saw what was slowly happening. I mean, I remember in Delhi at one time, Bhinderwala was actually, I was in the defense ministry at that time, Bhinderwala sat on the top of a bus. He was, there was an arrest warrant out for him. And he drove in the bus all over Central Vista, Rajpath, the whole area. He was driving with all his followers with guns in the heart of Delhi. Now, if you prop up some people and where religion and politics gets mixed, we have seen finally what the ultimate result was. And I don't think we want that to happen in the future in another situation. That is why we are just saying we have to be cautious. Even if somebody has used this for an electoral purpose, you won the elections, you repeated, you won. Please now go, be careful, cautious, step back for the larger good of the country. I mean, that is what basically, we are trying to say.
I just add to what Mr. Pillai has said. I don't know whether any is appearing in your state newspapers or central. Over the last 2 months, a man has landed in Punjab who's ostensibly come from Dubai, and he was clean shaven when he reached Punjab. He has now become an Amritari Sikh at Anandpur Sahib, and he went to Bhindranwale's village Rode, and there was a big gathering there in which his, what they call the star bandi, that tied the turban on his head. And when I left 2 days ago, he had started a march from the Akal Takht at Amritsar to reach Anandpur Sahib. On the way, stopping at meetings and preaching and converting Sikh, baptizing Sikhs to the hard rituals of an Amritari Sikh. and he has followers with arms, and he displays them openly on the social media, and so far cases are being registered. But I don't think at the political level anybody is taking it seriously, because the Punjab government is very active in Gujarat, campaigning over there. And by the time they realize what is happening, this movement is going to build up, because we have a large number of unemployed village boys. Thank you.
I'll just add that while single crime can happen without knowledge, all major movements, they always have a three-stage movement. One is the incubation period. Then comes the manifestation period. And it has been my experience that incubation period, it is generally neglected. Manifestation period initially also is a very this thing. And it is only when it reaches its peak that we start thinking of this thing. The effort that we are making now is that can we spot these dangers and take steps at the incubation level. You'll need, obviously, normal citizens also to join you in this bid. But first, of course, the task has to be handled by those who are entrusted with this responsibility. That is what we are trying to tell you.
Richa Minocha from the Symbiosis School for Liberal Arts. So I've enjoyed all the presentations, and this can probably be an add-on, and I would be happy for comments from the panel. So when we are talking of dissatisfied communities, I think the scenario with respect to ecological communities who are displaced from land and livelihoods becomes very important. For instance, the Kondh women of Orissa who drew on the might of the mighty Vedanta group. Similarly, there are women in Shakrori village in Himachal Pradesh who took on Lafad cement plant, and so on and so forth. So I think, and also if we are talking of national sovereignty, the issue of nutritional security and food sovereignty become very important, the right to grow what we want to grow. And these issues are also causes for conflicts, and I think very important, I think, determinants for...
Keep the mic a little at a distance and then speak, because here it is coming in a muffled manner.
I'm sorry. So I'm saying food security and food sovereignty issues also for ecological communities whose commons are under threat, and the right to grow what they want to eat, and also nutritional security and other components for avoiding conflict and in the interest of internal security is important.
We don't see food security as a cause for this, but we need to be cautious about food security. Because if you change currently, as you know, during the pandemic period, the best performing sector was the agriculture sector, which is large, except for a few largely unorganized sector. But it produced 4% of the GDP. The question is, food security depends on what kind of food you are talking about. So the government is already a sort of caution, but there are signs which earlier years, I remember, that when food, particularly wheat, rotted on platforms of Punjab, or some such things happened. So that kind of a thing has become rarer now. So I do not see an immediate threat so far as food security is concerned, but we need to be cautious. About cyber, or network security that you are talking about, there is a serious problem that looms large, because we are going for IoT introduction. So when Internet of Things are introduced, it will be exponentially large number of units, which means exponentially large volume of data. And when you have exponentially large volume of data, have we readied ourselves for that? We are making a law where you want data to land at your location. So what will happen to that? Who will store it? The data law which has been framed that is yet to be made public. So once it is made public, we will be able to, but once it went to the parliament, it came back, and I believe it is again ready and is being submitted. So, but the point is that you will have serious problem of managing the cyber security because it is by nature vulnerable to intrusion from outside, and also because I am, as a professional security person, I'm not convinced that we have taken advanced care of how to manage the data that we generate and we say we'll keep safe. That is the only thing.
I was also
last
talking of
question.
land acquisition.
Pardon?
No, I had also mentioned land acquisition, land grabbing as a problem leading to dissatisfied communities as a source of internal conflict.
After that, you're mentioning a particular community. Which is that?
The Kond women of Orissa who took on the Vedant group of industries and threw them out of their commons. So.
This is normally a law, not a problem. I think it's Punjab situation. Is it land acquisition? Illegal land acquisition.
No, this is legal, sir. No, it's legal. It is legal, but coercive. It is legal and coercive. What is happening in Punjab is that the common land in the villages, which had been occupied by the villagers, the wealthier villagers, and hundreds and thousands of acres, the government has initiated a process and is getting those lands, getting the possession of those lands back to with the government, and then probably they'll allot it to the landless laborers.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, because I think we have overshot our welcome. I was asked to stop at 30. So thank you very much. This has been a lively question answer, and I hope that we have quenched some of your curiosities, if not all. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Pradyot Haldar, and the distinguished panelists, Mr. Gurbachan Jagat, Dr. Ajay Sahni, and Mr. Gopal Pillai. Thank you for this session. Ladies and gentlemen, we will now have a short break for tea and then resume for our next session on the China-Pakistan combined threat to India's security. May I kindly request everyone to please be back by 12 noon. Thank you.